Oh my God, ladies and gentlemen, you're back. I appreciate it. Thank you. Welcome back to the LiefX podcast. We're getting close to a name. I'm thinking the Lounge with Leaf, maybe? Does it even need a name? Keep the comments coming down below. I've seen some great suggestions recently. Yes, I've seen Turtle. We're trying to get Turtle, but he is a busy, busy man, Mr. Isaac App. So we're trying. Keep the comments coming, who you want to see. Reminder that we are on Spotify as well. If you'd rather listen there, you can find the link down in the description below. And get in the Discord. Join us. You can find out whenever episodes are going live and any other content that I'm making. And just chat and hang out with me all throughout the week. Link is also down in the description below. If you're on Spotify, you can find all these links and stuff on the YouTube link. And I believe in the Spotify description. Yes, I've been putting it there as well. But get over to the comments on YouTube and join the conversation. This is too much talking from me. And I apologize, I'm a little nasally, getting over a head cold. But we'll just make this guest do a lot of the talking. You've already seen the title. It's Jeff Scalamara, Danger Taco. Did I say the last name right?
Pretty much. It's like an
Scalamara?
old Yugoslavian Croatian name.
Scalamara.
So it's all the vowels don't really sound like what it is.
Scalamara.
Scalamara is usually the closest.
Okay. Well, how would you say it?
Scalamara.
Oh, you would okay. It was okay.
Yeah, so it's like the in the beginning. It doesn't feel natural at all. Well, how you say it is probably how 99% of people say it, and it's not far enough away that I'm going to be like, nice try though, and just get all like uppity.
I'm also just going to call you Taco from here on out. How's that?
That's 100% fair. Also, this is like definitely one of those names where I envy other people, like my good friend Bass, whose like legal name is Oliver Bass, which is already a great broadcast name. You have JSA, just staying alive, which is Jesse Knight, or Jesse English rather. Yeah. And obviously Stumpy is a great name as well. It's like some people are just born with like naturally.
I have to say though, Jesse English does sound like a porn name.
Yeah, I mean, that's some people's take on it, but I mean, there's multiple uses for every name. Or you can go into many different fields that it's appropriate.
Oh, that's great. Well, I have to ask the question off the bat. It's going to be a question you've probably been asked a million times, but I need to know, what is your favorite kind of taco?
Oh, so I go by. There was a place when I first graduated from college, and I went out into the world and experienced the world outside of being the world being New York State, because that's where I've lived most of my life. And then I got my job in Tucson. I went to this place called Street Taco and Beer Company in downtown Tucson, and like best tacos I've had in my life. And the order for all the tacos was basically like, this is the taco. Like, This is what you're getting. And it's a steak taco on like a small core tortilla with some chopped onion and some parsley, and maybe some like additional random like things you can throw in there. But it was just very simple and it was very nice. So it's just a steak taco with like chopped onion, parsley, and anything else was called like a gringo taco. If you wanted like, if you wanted anything else, just because they were like, this is what a taco is, and if you ordered anything else, you're just some random dude from Minnesota who wants a taco. Yeah. So, and I feel like that's a great way to go by it. It's like, okay, you just have like the bare essentials, then everything else is just extra.
That's fun. Yeah. So the best taco I've ever had in my life to this day. So it really sucks. Where I live, we have an incredible amount of food in Ontario. So it's East Coast. I think in general just has a lot of good. Most cities you go, Canada or the US, there's a lot of diversity in that area. I mean, New York, right? Around Toronto. And so you get a lot of really good diverse food. People coming into the country, opening up their own restaurants and making some great stuff. And my city is no stranger to that. The one thing we do not do well, though, is Mexican food. And to get good Mexican, whenever I'm in LA, I have to get Mexican there because it's so much better. But in Ohio, no, not Ohio. Where was I? What's the Mormon place?
Utah.
Utah, that's the one thing. I was in Utah for an event. That was weird. So I was in Utah, and there was this food truck on the side of the road, just around there where my hotel was. I was wandering around the streets, and their food truck, and I got these tacos. I have photos. I wish I could pull them up right now, but they were the best things I've ever had. And straight up, it was just like steak. I forget what I got. I got like carne asada on one, and then I forget what I got on the other. But it was chicken. But it was pretty much just the meat and like maybe some onions or whatever. And that was pretty much it. And it was so good. I didn't realize that such a simple taco could be so good.
Yeah, I do feel like that's also a thing with a lot of food dishes. The
People
most things that
overcomplicate them.
yeah, they try to have like some edge to it. Like there's a definitely my biggest pet peeve actually is, and I experience this all the time. Mostly when I travel, it's for like esports work or when you're going to like a LAN or something, and there's all
Right.
these like trendy restaurants because the convention centers are usually in like a nice part of town.
Yeah.
And you'll go into this restaurant and you're like, all right, cool. So this is a taco shop, or like I think the most cutting example is like you go to like a pizza place. It's like obviously there's like regular slices, but then they have like these specialty slices and there's like
Yeah.
700 ingredients on them. And I'm
Like, what's
like,
going on?
oh, that's a barbecue chicken pizza. But there's also, I guess, avocado, and then they have like roasted pheasant like drizzled on there. Then they have black truffle oil. I'm not really sure what that adds. And then on top of all that, there's like more and more things. And I feel like a child every time I'm like, ah, dope. That looks so good. Can you take off like 75% of those ingredients? Because it's like I do feel like a child where it's like I don't want the spinach in this dish.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But that's how I feel
it's
genuinely
sometimes
about a lot of them.
it's too much. Like, I mean, like, yeah, we got a taco place here in my town, and again, it's the tacos are already like small. They're like that big, and it's like soft shell, and then you fold it, and it's even like it's small. But they got the craziest stuff on it, like like pickled onions with like all this other stuff, and it's like sure this could be good in it like a completely separate dish, but in a taco, like I'll be honest, it's so bad here that like some of the best tacos I can get is just a hard shelled like Locos Doritos from Taco Bell.
It's a strange place. I think Taco Bell definitely has, I would say, polluted the discourse for tacos in general. Because in my opinion, Taco Bell is in a strange middle ground. Because I know someone, like I said, I went to the Southwest, lived there for a while.
Right.
Obviously, been back there quite a lot, and I love the Mexican over there. Chicago, also, where I spent a great deal of my life, has a huge Hispanic population, and the food out there is great.
Have you been to Le Cheval, or I think it is?
Yes, a while back. That was like
The burger place.
yes,
Oh,
it is.
so
It is pretty
good.
solid.
It's
yes,
so good. Sorry to
Chicago is. I mean, granted, every big city has like a lot of great places.
That's true. Yeah,
I very much live and die by the idea that like every place has like pretty above average food in major cities, but there's like always those like hidden gems that are like off that. Because like I don't know what the equivalent would be for Chicago, maybe like the River District, but like Times Square within New York City and a lot of other like big cities have like those like tourist trap where it's like this is where you want to go. But then if you ask like anyone who has lived there for a while, they're like that's like the last place. Yeah, that's like the last place you want to go. For me, it's like growing up in New York. A lot of people were like, go to Canal Street, get the Chinese down there. Like okay, and then they were right. It was legitimately insane. So there's an element to like definitely asking the locals because people will guide you in the right direction.
Right. So yeah, sorry to digress you, but yeah, Taco Bell is that middle.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So no, I digress myself. I saw an off ramp, but I'm like, I'm going away. My take on Taco Bell is basically like, I love a good taco. I love like a good hand prepared one, mom and pop shop, like hole in the wall place. But I still love Taco Bell, and I think it's a lot due to the sauces. And the biggest complaint I get from people about that attitude is they're like, if you want actual like Mexican cuisine or Tex-Mex or something, go to a place. And I'm like, but this is the catch. Taco Bell is like a remix of that cuisine. It's not actually the same. So when I say I want Taco Bell, what I'm not saying is, I would love a taco or a burrito or whatever, a wrap. I'm saying I want Taco Bell specifically. And I think that's a very important to think, because I think people think it's like, oh, this is what Americans think Mexican is, but it's not. And I'm like, no, I know it's not. It's very much just Americans being like, what if we did this? And they twist it a little bit. Probably use low quality meat. In fact, they definitely do.
Well, 100% low quality. Yeah.
But the sauces and like the Chipotle sauce that they have, I found out you can order that on Amazon, and my life has never been different.
Oh, really?
Never been more improved by that knowledge.
I wonder if that's an American only thing. I have to look at that. Because I mean,
it's in stores. I know the hot sauce is. The Chipotle sauce is not. You have to I have Amazon that sometimes.
Yeah, no. See, I've never. The first time I ever saw like the Taco Bell sauce or like Chick-fil-A sauce in a store was an import store at the mall where they import goods from different countries. So I don't know if that's possible.
It's the American section.
Yeah.
I can already see it in my head. Like that's exactly like how it gets structured. Like this is what Americans eat.
Yeah.
If you know nothing else about this country, this is like 90% of their diet.
There's some crazy stuff. In fact, I mean, my buddy showed me cheese in a can. That was crazy to me. Like the spray, the easy cheese or whatever it is.
Yes. Yeah, the cheese whiz.
Yeah, but I know we have cheese whiz, but it's in like a jar and you scrape it out, right?
Oh, yeah, I've never experienced cheese in that fashion.
Okay. Yeah,
or cheese whiz in that fashion.
Oh, interesting.
We do have like sliced and shredded cheese, so that's fine. Like we can buy it at a deli or something.
No, we're setting the narrative now that Americans just eat cheese out of nozzle canisters.
That's how you prep pizza. Yeah, you take it out of the oven and then just like all over it.
What's the craziest thing you've seen in a can? Because to me, cheese was near the top of my list.
Ooh. I don't know. There's like I'm trying to like think back. I feel like that stuff always comes up when I'm in my worst mental state, like driving down the highway and you stop at a rest stop and they're like, "Oh, do you want some food?" And you're like, "Sure." And then you open it up and it's like all off-brand, cheap to make stuff. Like I saw one that was fruit flavored popcorn. And curiosity got me better on that one, and I got it, and it did not emulate the taste of fruit in a popcorn layer.
Was it like a powder they put on, or like did they just squeeze juice?
It was just multicolored kernels. So like when you looked at it, the shtick was like, oh, this one's yellow, like a lemon. This one's red, like a strawberry. But as soon as you take, also it just defeats the at least for me, I don't eat popcorn individually, so it's like I feel like that's how you would capture it. Like if they're all individually flavored, you go help. But imagine just eating a thing of popcorn just by like one thing at a time instead of maybe that's the way everyone else does it. But for me, it's like I take at least like a small handful and then put it in like 5-6 at a time.
I do this and it's in my hand and I just shovel it in.
Yeah. You just funnel it or something. So yeah, the idea that they're going to individually flavor each part of the popcorn and you can't just throw it all in like it's a smoothie. It was a strange experience. But for canned stuff, I would say, yeah, stuff like that. There's like, I have seen like stuff like Christmas or like Thanksgiving dinner in a can or something where it's supposed to emulate like if you just blend it up like turkey sauce, mashed potatoes and everything, it's like that. And this is not like a super well known thing, but it is a thing that does exist. If people just want like the nostalgia of it with none of the prep work, it's like Thanksgiving or like dinner in a can or something. And more or less it's like a product. I don't know its popularity nowadays. But yeah, it's basically trying to like combine all of the flavors and like olfactory reminders of those types of old-fashioned dinners into like just a very accessible. If this is the same brand that I'm thinking of, I'll be very happy. But it's very similar to that. It's basically like
Christmas tinner. It's called.
Yes, exactly. So it just tries to combine everything. And I will say, I dare anyone on a first date to like come out and say like I'm gonna make you a traditional dinner and then come out with a can and see if you don't get put on a watch list, because that is terrifying that people made that and people also buy it.
We're looking for sponsors on the podcast, so Christmas Terror, you want to hit me up?
A sponsor for all seasons.
How did we get here? How has humanity made it to this point?
I feel like it's inevitable in our search for peak efficiency. I feel like people miss the mark and then they land here instead of like at the next scientific breakthrough.
It's the old adage of the saying of your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't think whether they should.
There's one intern that was definitely like, I'm just here for credit. Like, I don't need to speak up, but I think this is an affront to God because this shouldn't have been allowed.
So how do you eat it? Do you eat it like fork taking a slice out of each layer, or do you turn it sideways and eat through the layers?
So I remember having this once because my friend saw it. Yes, my friend had. We went to the store. We saw this because in my college town, it's a rural area.
Sorry for anyone that is listening on podcast only and doesn't have visuals right now.
Oh, that's a
just a straight can. Yeah, you need to go back at some point and watch this. It's a straight can, and like just this compacted. Like there's layers of green and brown, and I see potato. I don't know which part is the meat, to be honest. In this layer, I think there's cranberry sauce and gravy. Yeah, so it's just compacted in there.
Yeah, basically, and also very telling that I'm talking about my days in college, which was in New York. And the top left of this screenshot is Central New York's #1 for New Country, because it's a radio station that's covering this can for reasons that we don't know. Um, and so this can, I personally like just poured it out, and when you heat it, it kind of congeals together, because I really feel like it's just trying to give you, like, instead of how. Actually, Leaf, I'm actually curious about this. Do you eat when there's like separate
Yes, I
things
eat.
within the dish, like mashed potatoes, turkey or chicken, like whatever, asparagus? I don't know what people eat. Do you eat everything like by itself? Like, do you eat one thing at a time, or do you try to like take bite in like a circle
No,
to try to get
I
all the
don't.
flavors?
So just inherently, I with ADHD, I need constant mix-ups for my brain. So even right now, like I'm a snacker. Right beside me, I got little Snyder's pretzel bits. I got corn nuts right here. Usually I have a bag of chips. Oh, I do have a bag of chips down there. Some all dressed chips. I'm a snacker, right? I need constant stimulation with new flavors. So yeah, I will never eat one of everything all at once. Like I'll eat pieces of the plate as I go through, and often I don't finish it, so I try to get halfway through each of the things, so I have another whole meal later.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then that is good, because this thing you kind of have to avoid then. So I know now that you won't be safe, because more or less when you heat this up, it is just trying to be like, this is all the flavors, and when you eat it, it does kind of capture us, because you at least maybe this is the same one, but like you pretty much pour it out and heat it up, and then it kind of just congeals. It's kind of like a soup, almost like a thick soup, like one of those creamy soups. Yeah, and it does I will say it does taste like surprisingly like what you'd expect it to, but that isn't necessarily a good thing, because there's the reasons where these things are prepared separately. Also, I just noticed, I think that's a gaming controller under Christmas dinner. I'm not sure why this is video game related.
It is. You are absolutely right.
Maybe that's the marketing push that they needed for this. They're like, "Hey, gamers, do you need time getting back from what's a recent game? Skyrim." It's like watching Skyrim. Then here's a dinner that you can just prep in 3 minutes in the microwave, and then it's just like, sure, here's a gaming controller.
Yeah, I feel like if you're at the point where you're eating this, you're probably in a situation where you're lonely.
I don't like to make assumptions often, but that's 100% what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know a fulfilled person who's reached enlightenment in their personal life is buying this dinner.
Well, yeah. Well, again, unless it's like, ironically, I would buy this just to try it, right? But like, if you're unironically eating this for dinner, join the Discord. Come hang out with us.
Yeah, there are other ways to spend your evening.
Especially if you're American. We've already had our Thanksgiving in Canada, so on Thanksgiving for America, I'm just chilling. Come to the Discord, hang out in voice. We'll chill. We'll make sure you're not eating Christmas dinner.
That's something I've never actually minded, though, with maybe it's just like a personality thing, but like I'm pretty introverted day to day, and throughout my life, like my parents are very much like, and this won't go into a tangent about their beliefs, but like they're very like old school conservative, and like it's like you have to pay your way, you have to do whatever you can, which I endorse, because yes, it is good to do your own thing and be independent.
That's fair.
But for me, it was always kind of like I was just like broke like forever, like even after college. Fun fact, if you get a psych degree, you're not going to get paid immediately when you're pursuing going into your graduate degree, getting your master's, PhD. But I was not making a lot of money, and they kept being like, "Oh my God, Jeff, please come home for holidays." And I'm like, "I have no money for that." And they're like, "Jeff, desperately want to see you. Like, I haven't seen you in so long." And I'm like, "Okay, so can you give me some money?" And meanwhile, my parents are doing fine now, but they just be like, I don't know if I can do that, because they're so opposed to the idea of like giving an adult child like money to help out with that, because they're like, you should be fine paying for that on your own. So I'm like, so clearly you don't. So I've been conditioned by holidays to just be like whatever about it.
Yeah.
But I feel like I lack that sentimentality for a lot of people, whereas like other people are like, it feels so weird to be alone on like Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever. And I'm just like, I'm honestly pretty chill. I'll just call my parents and be like, what's up? But I don't really get that thing where I am in a position to get the Christmas dinner, be like, I need to recapture the magic.
Right. Yeah. I actually do share a bit of that, where sometimes it's hard. Like I actually have to actively remind myself to like say happy birthday to people, because I straight up just, well, I didn't know what day it was, but I also just straight up forgot my girlfriend's birthday what day it was. And again, it was only like a year and a half or something into our relationship, so give me a break. But it was like I don't care about birthdays like at all, right? Like even like mine just passed I don't even know how a few weeks ago, but it's like I went out and I had fun with friends, but I didn't plan it around my birthday. I just did it because I'm like, this happens to be the day we're going out. I forgot it was my birthday, even to that day, right? Because it's just those moments. Every day is the same kind of to me. If I can spend time with family, I love it. I'll do that any day. I don't need a holiday to tell me what to do. And some of the holidays like Christmas are kind of tainted with like you have to buy gifts and stuff. And it's like you shouldn't. Why? Let's just hang out with your family, you know. So I've always been kind of just meh on them. So I feel that where it's hard for me when someone's like, oh, it's my birthday, or as you said, I'm alone, or I can't do anything for my birthday. I'm like, okay, we'll do it tomorrow, right? Like, you know, do it another day.
I feel like I don't know, the mix of like this day isn't super special. Also, I feel like that's just an esport phenomenon where like I don't know what day it is.
Oh yeah, I know.
Because Monday through Friday doesn't really matter. All I know is that I wake up, I check a Google Calendar. If I have an alert for an event I'm working or something, I have to be somewhere at some time, I know. But 90% of the time, especially on stream when you're talking to people, it's like, hey, welcome. How's your stay been? Just I'm like really thinking, because I'm like, what day is it? Because I generally know what days the events are, but ultimately, yeah, it isn't really important. And I'm 100% the same way with a lot of that stuff. I feel like also the opposition to like celebrations are like, as you get older, the birthdays I feel like get less significant because there's less like milestone stuff. You get a lot clustered in between like 16 and I would say like 21 in terms of like significant milestones.
For
like
Canada, after 19, you're done. Like, what do you?
That is true. Well, yeah, for me, it's like the sentimentalities because like 16 in US is like you're eligible to get your driver's permit, so you're like starting to potentially get that. 17, you can watch R-rated movies by yourself. 18, you're a legal adult. 19 is kind of like a whatever one, but 20, it's like, oh, you're in your 20s, so it's like at least like a significant milestone in terms of like that's how old you're getting. 21 is legally drinking age, and I guess 25 I think you can rent a car in every state. But like that's like not super big, but like it's at least the last one. But that's just like, you know, the people who are making the age limits just wanted to throw you in a treat in your mid-20s. Like, oh, you ran out of cool stuff. With that car over there, you could technically take that out for a couple days. Like, all right, yeah, totally. So I guess that kind of works.
You know what? Why the powers that be need to start arbitrarily giving older folk dates? Like, what can we give to 32-year-olds? What can you just arbitrarily do at 32 that you can't do before that? That's a long time to hold that away from people, though.
Yeah, I feel like that's a strange. I feel because in my mind, I'm thinking about all the things that people at that age would like to start to get into, and like what it would make sense to gatekeep. But then I'm like, my mind just goes to like way too extreme off the bat. I was like, maybe you can't own a house until you're 32, and I'm like, that'd be a little rude if you're like.
That's pretty much the reality, anyways.
I mean, yeah, but like it's also like one of those things where it's like, what if you are just financially well off and you're like, I would like a house. So like, how dare you think you're ready for that, Mr. 31-year-old? How about you wait another calendar year? It's just like, sorry, my bad.
Yeah, that would be. Well, I guess it has to be skill based because like that's the idea with the driving, with the renting, right? Is that you have years of doing it. So maybe at 32, you're allowed to do the plumbing in your friend's house.
I mean, yeah, anything before that, you're going right to jail. You're going to get as command.
Where's your license?
Wait a minute. The way you're holding that wrench. What's your age? Show me your ID right now. It's like, how do you know? Yeah, that kind of makes sense. The skill base does work. I feel like for a lot of that is like the old school, like puritanical logic was like, it's like, oh, well, you know, drinking age has to be higher because it's a taboo thing. And we can't have our young kids corrupted by the evils of alcohol. And it's like, yeah, sure, I guess that makes sense. Meanwhile, Europe's just like cracking a bottle of wine with your 12-year-old or whatever. But like
a picture the other day, it was, I mean, this was like in the 1800s, but like kids in Italy, or was it France, would just have a glass of wine with their lunch at like grade 5, just having a glass of wine.
I feel like it's pretty viable. But part of my understanding of that is that, at least in Italy, or like Mediterranean area in general, you could have wine, but it was also because it was really hard to get like super clean water. So sometimes you just had like wine, and it's like, oh, it might just be easier to do that. And I feel like that because of that, the taboo was kind of pushed away. Whereas I think the US comes from, granted, I mean, there's also something I just talk about a lot. My research focus for my like decade of psychology was like religious thought and how it affects the society. So
Okay,
it's like
wow,
for
yeah, yeah.
for a lot of that, it's like a lot of the US is like stuck up in a lot of like things of like that's the devil's nectar. So it becomes very taboo. So like
Right.
everywhere else in the world where you can drink it like, yeah, 18, 19, 15, like, or just no limit at all, is really wrapped up in this idea of like, why are you limiting that? Like if it's about a family thing, but from the US perspective, it's like, no, it's about like the ability to abstain. It's about the ability to like think more
Uh-huh.
clearly and rationally. And I think we're coming at it from like some interesting perspectives, at least in that regard.
Okay, well, good. We just found out where we're going to tangent off to next, because I was eventually going to ask what your a lot of your schooling was, and you just answered that for me. So, um, I'd say it's because I'm a good host and I got our conversation going where it needed to, but I also forgot to introduce that you're a commentator and content creator at the beginning of this. So we pick our battles here of how good I am at this hosting thing. Let's talk about all that, because that's interesting. Because right now, yeah, especially we're just diving in. The U.S. Specifically is seeing like this insane amount of divide, and it is bleeding out to the rest of the world. I mean, you're also seeing. You mentioned specifically religious thinking affecting. I mean, there's the war obviously between with Palestine and Israel. Is like that these doctrines really embed themselves in people's lives, and we've seen how easy it is for people to just fall in, believe certain things, and then go like that is your identity. Now you defend it with your life, kind of thing. And the U.S. is seeing a lot of that split. And so I guess, Mike, I don't really have a question for this, but like, what is your thought on where humanity's at right now in terms of what we're seeing with how interconnected we are, and seeing all these ideologies and ways of life clashing with each other online, where they used to be maybe separated. We could isolate our tribes, but now we have to mingle.
I think that's always the eternal like pros and cons of especially social media with making us all interconnected. Like I
Right,
feel like there
right,
was some solace to take in the idea of like I have no idea what my neighbor thinks. Like
right.
growing
Yeah,
up, like
yeah.
back in like the 90s or before,
So
like I
saying,
don't know
"Hey,
what they think
George,"
about
is
things.
a friendly interaction. You don't know that there's some psycho murder or something. You're just like, "Hey," and now it's a good interaction. You don't have to worry about that thing.
Yeah, plenty of people have been tainted by like, meeting them, talking to them, and then they just share like the most legitimately batshit insane thing you've ever seen on social media. And you're
Unhinged,
like,
yeah.
oh, I didn't realize you were unhinged. But yeah, for me, I grew up at least in New York State, which is, I think for a lot of people, they're like, oh, it's overwhelmingly Democrat and liberal. But that's like in the cities. Like for the most
Yeah.
part, like New York, especially when you get to upstate, is pretty moderate to conservative. It's just they're like vastly outnumbered as
Right.
you get downstate. I grew up in a pretty conservative household. I myself was not. And so when I went to college, I liked psych because I was fascinated by political thought and the idea within psych, there's like multiple disciplines. Social psychology is what I got into, which is essentially how the influence of other people um,
Hmm.
affects our like one person's or a group of people's like thinking, behavior, feelings.
Right.
And so I think for me, political topics like that were always interesting because I was like, yeah, why can't we get along? Like, why can't we get into that? And there's a whole can of worms with that. But for me, like, I think social media definitely exacerbates it. And that's why I definitely try to push the idea that it's incredibly important to have those down to earth, awkward conversations with
Absolutely.
that awkward family member
Yes.
from time to time because it's very hard to keep it non emotional. But it's also important to know because the biggest thing I see, speaking of this being recorded and you put this on YouTube, for example, YouTube is a great thing in many ways. It is also so easy to radicalize people on a
Yeah.
platform that feeds into that. But I mean, we talk about like the algorithm. The biggest issue I feel like is the fact that most people are blind to it. You view it as a service, like, oh, you saw this fun video of a cat. Here's more cat videos. You're like, yes, love cat videos.
Yeah.
But then the issue is if you click a political topic, suddenly YouTube, it's an indifferent machine. It just says, well, people who watch this video about changing demographics in the US also liked this video. And potentially people can then start going down this rabbit hole. And that's why I think you see
Yeah.
when you look at terrorist activity, at least in the US, it's overwhelmingly radicalized white Christians
Yeah.
because that is the current dynamics happening within at least racial and religious lines. And so
Uh-huh.
for me, seeing YouTube, I get really concerned about people. I think Facebook also became very famous for this of going down this rabbit hole, which creators will talk about these conservative topics or more like hardcore on left and right topics. And then their audience will view that, drive them to say, hey, I want even more of this. Creators make more of it, then the viewers get more of it. And eventually, like, I mean, sometimes just go to a friend's house and look at their algorithms. Sometimes it's completely different. You've seen videos you've never seen. And I have had friends who, they're starting to talk to me in a certain way in college. And I was just like, what's going on there? And he started showing me these videos. I'm like, I've never seen these before. And they were just wild with just how aggressive they were in the language and phrasing. And that was when I first got into like deep dive into like political psychology, because I was fascinated by like how this dude who's like pretty chill, just like very in the short amount of time, just started getting very active in circles I found pretty troubling based on just the sheer
happened to a friend of mine as well.
Negative energy.
Yeah. And the problem is also that, again, you talked about that feedback loop that social media and TikTok. This is why I warn people to really think about. I mean, TikTok is designed to manipulate your brain. It's also designed to make you less. It runs your dopamine levels throughout the day. By the end of the day, you don't want to do anything. You're more depressed. So you go back, you chase the dragon, and they can lock in a profile for you, a personality report within 45 minutes of scrolling. There have been tests with bots to say, okay, this bot is depressed, this bot is happy, this bot likes sports, and TikTok is so refined in being able to do that. And then what you can do is you can start, if you do want to start feeding things to people specifically, you could start in those very refined profiles you have, start feeding very specific doctrines to people that you want them to believe. You could say an outside actor wants to divide a population. They can do it through an app like that. That's wildly popular with a young generation. They could unite people as well. That's why what's shown in China on TikTok is mostly educational stuff, right? It's because you can cause that chaos. And so people have to be aware of it. But that's the other thing, is being aware of it. And I don't think we teach people enough in school about just how the brain operates in general. We got to teach them about tribalism. You got to teach them about all their biases. And without teaching people those things, people aren't aware. You can still get trapped into those. Like, they're called biases for a reason. But thinking about them at least is that first step. You could look at that. Like, I could get shown the same video as our buddies there that went down those rabbit holes, but you and I might now think, but this just factually doesn't make sense. Let me go look it up. And you look it up, right? But a lot of people don't have that, aren't taught that skill set in school to look or question the thing in front of them. They're just like, well, if it's by this person that has said another true thing, this one must be true as well. And it's very hard once you start attaching that, especially with religion. When you start attaching that to your personality, it gets harder and harder to reject those things if there is something contradictory to that thing you believed in. So it gets even harder the further someone gets down a rabbit hole to pull them out.
I particularly think that I think the awareness aspect is kind of what I preach the same, especially because we found, at least within psychology, used to be a lot of focus on making sure that people are aware of their biases. But the thing is, there's also a backfire effect with a lot of that, in that there was a huge push whenever Harvard really got to going into an implicit association test. Essentially, if people have never heard of that, it's essentially a test where you are shown a list of words and some pictures, and more or less the foundational kind of like breakout moment for this test was like, okay, we're going to show you a bunch of words that mean good things and a bunch of words that mean bad things, and then tangentially we're going to show you like white faces and black faces. And they found that like overwhelmingly people were quicker in the immediate implicit or like kind of like underlying associations between associating white and good and black faces with bad words. And the thing is, most, if not all, people have a little bit of bias toward like any singular group, but that does not necessarily mean you're racist. The finding was supposed to be like, hey, everyone has a little bias. And so they tried to use that to teach anti-racism and a lot of anti-bigotry workshops in like corporations, in like large university settings. And the issue that they kept running into is that they would try to talk to people about this, but then if you tell everyone that it's natural to be biased, but you must stay aware and have that, what you might call metacognition, thinking about your own thinking, like, why am I so quick to, think that or feel this or whatever, then some people are like, oh, well, if it's natural, then this must be fine. And so it's like, well, the thing is, we
That's
have to
not what
pair
we're
that.
trying-
It's pair that with like, it's bad to think this about people with no other information.
Right.
And even though you can't do anything about it, because ultimately you can be the most like woke person ever and still have like tinges of just like, ooh, like, I don't like that off the bat or something. And then you're like, oh, wait, that's fine. And I think that awareness, as you mentioned, is super important to teach. And people might say like, oh, I mean, that's a whole other thing we'd have to get into, but like people are like, oh, that's the woke agenda. That's just making kids super like passionate about anything and not using their rational minds. Like, it's not even rationality. It's just, I think it's important to know that you're not just getting like swept away by emotion all the time. You should definitely try to ground yourself and be like, how do I understand what I'm feeling? I feel like general emotional intelligence is like one of the most attractive things in any people that I meet throughout my life. Cause that's, I think, something we don't appreciate enough, despite how closely entwined it is as a form of intelligence that isn't just like book smarts and logic or whatever.
It's one thing I'm happy that I at least have a little bit of, because I'm really stupid, but at least I can I can often often feel the emotions of others, and that's just always been nice in creating connections with people. Here's an interesting one. So I actually took that test you talked about.
Yeah.
And mine, and I'm curious as to, I tried to think about why this might be. And I wonder if it has to do with empathy pulling me the other way. But I was actually in favor of positives being attributed to the photos of black people with, let me find it right now. Where is it? Because it was white people and black people and then good and bad. I think I sent it to someone. I can't remember where. And it was relatively, because I figured it was like a percent, and it was more in favor of the photos of black people, and I wonder if that's because of my, just again seeing how much what my social media feed is filled up with, seeing how much injustice has been done, especially with our neighboring country, America, and I wonder if my brain started making that flip. I don't know. It was interesting. Where is it? Here it was. Yeah. Your responses suggest a moderate automatic preference for black people over white people. So it's moderate. So I think that means like not too much. So it was just interesting how it got.
Yeah. It's not for
it to be the other way. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the default for a lot of people, but like for the most part, it's people have arguments about, in psych, it's called effect size, which is essentially like if there is a statistically different or a statistical difference in terms of like how, because by the way, when we're saying there's a difference, the IT associates reaction time. So it's like you pretty much flashes the word, like the good or bad word in the face. And then it's how fast you can correctly or like in a proper, like socially acceptable way, associate each face.
Right.
And basically it's like if you're faster on one way, that's your preference. And so seeing that's it's nice to see. And it's a good, definitely an interesting thought process. But like for IAT, a lot of people say the effect size is troubling in that, like, if there is a difference, like, oh, you are, because everyone can look at what's called a descriptive statistic and say, well, this reaction time is less than the other. But if you rerun that 1,000 times, you might still get the difference, but it's like a negligible difference.
Right.
So the effect size is like, okay, this is the difference, but how big of an actual effect are we seeing? Because just because someone is slower in something does not mean much. On top of the fact that, like, you could have a preference and still not treat people that differently. Like, we don't really know the true extent of that. And I do like that idea that, like, if you do have a decent amount of empathy and you're trying to come around, maybe that does impact things. I think there's a lot of hand wringing about there's nothing we can do about it. Like, this is how we are. But I don't really think that's accurate. And on top of the fact of, like, we always think it comes from 100% of the time from like emotional reaction to rationalization to actual behavior. But I do feel like there is a little bit of feedback in that if you change your behavior enough, I think it can work a little bit backwards and change those automatic associations. I definitely think you can find that. So I wouldn't be surprised.
No, I agree. I think it was really nice. I'm super happy because I could easily have seen my biases going a completely different way. Growing up, my school, I mean, just in Canada in general, we're a bit ahead of the curve on. I mean, obviously, there's still going to be bigots anywhere. We were a bit ahead of the curve on when it came to gay relationships. We had marriage legalized a long time ago. In my class, and like even early on, like, K to 6, at grade 7, 8, I had people that were already out of the closet and just openly gay. I had some of my best friends. I had people with light skin, people with dark skin, all over the spectrum. And to me, it made no difference. So I think that really helped growing up. The biases that like I also grew up though a bit Christian, so that's why I could see it if I didn't have those diverse interactions as a child. That okay, maybe that radicalization could have happened later on if I only hung around people that looked like myself or acted like myself because of the religious aspect. Thankfully, that went out the window once I think it was around 18 to 21. I had the cognitive dissonance era where I was like, but I believe this my whole life. It's my identity. I have to believe this, but I can't reconcile this. So those were struggling 2 years or 3 years of trying to sort that out. But I could have seen it again. Just to reiterate, going the other direction had I not had those diverse interactions as a kid.
That's my biggest. That was one of my biggest passions growing up, is especially when you look at certain sections of America, and I'm sure Canada probably has this a while. I feel like I've seen some of the more rural or less sparse, like more sparsely populated areas. I want to say the Alberta area. It's typically like
Alberta's our south.
yeah. That's what people have said. It's like that's like the Alabama area, maybe. But ultimately, there are a lot of places that are like very, especially after 9/11, was kind of like a watershed moment of like very anti-Muslim, very aggressive towards certain minorities. But then you look at the diversity of some of these towns, and you realize like, wait, how are you even having an opinion about some of these religions when like there's so few? I mean, crazy moment for me was like realizing I grew up in a very high density, like Jewish neighborhood, a lot of Jewish families. And so in my mind, if you were like, hey, how many families in the US, like what percentage of the US is like Jewish? I'd be like, I don't know, based on this, like 10 to 20%. Right. And in reality, it's like less than 2%. Like it's like insane with Muslim families, but like people get so aggressive about this and have people like, oh, this is Islam is a religion of violence and it's so terrible. And I started to realize like, why are they thinking this way? Because if you ask most people where any of their information about like Islam comes from, it's news media reporting on like violent extremism or violence in the Middle East. And so going back to, I don't know, the manifesto of things I wish people were taught better in schools is media criticism of like understanding like why things get covered the way they do. And I will say that Twitter has many faults. One thing that is always very nice is I do see a fair amount of takes in the quote retweets trying to break down news about like, just because it is reported this way does not mean that there is not like some way to break it down. Even when people like attack sources they like, I do think it's important to just realize like phrasing is important. What's put in a headline is important. Active or passive voice is very important in all of that. And I wish there was a bit more thrust put behind that aspect of being able to critically think and being able to break that down.
I will say that one of the as much as there's been problems with the Elon takeover, I will say the notes thing has been really nice.
That is the only thing that I'm like 100%.
Yeah, it's like, okay, that's nice. That's good. Even on his own tweets, sometimes you'll see notes saying like, that's not right. And it's like,
that's kind of why I'm scared that it's one day he's just gonna be like, I don't like being kind of ratioed by community notes, and then just it gets wiped away, and I'm like the one good thing that was added.
That's funny. Yeah, it's just interesting overall. Just thinking about just the interactions. I think the other problem with social media, as great as it is to allow. I mean, again, I always think like how many bands have started because they collaborated online and now have successful careers, or there was this one drummer I saw in I forget where it was. I forget which country it was in Africa. And he was playing on just like these worn down, completely almost useless drums, and someone recorded him, put it up, and the video popped off. And then a college or a musician saw it, talked to a college, and got the guy a scholarship to go to college. But this is some just dude in like a really small town in somewhere in Africa, and that I don't know. I think there's maybe like 100 people in his village, and he's just banging, but he was so talented, and never would have been discovered had we not had like a YouTube, like social media, like YouTube, right? So it's so cool for those moments. But then you'll also have these situations where people aren't actually interacting with people, and because you have to get noticed, you need to invoke emotion usually in people immediately, and the easiest emotion to invoke is usually anger, hatred, the negative emotions. So people go that route, and then when you say something online that contradicts something, they immediately think, oh, I feel like we've been can't think of the word now, but we've been kind of made to be in this route where, oh, someone is immediately disagreeing with me, and that's challenging who I am. So we think that people challenging those things is now a reason to go at war with those people, when really it's like as you said too, I love actually having those awkward conversations with people, because I think it's the moment where you really can create that human connection and listen to each other. The second you yell at someone, they're not going to listen to you. So I try to sit there, listen to them first, and then say, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you help me understand better? And then by walking them through their own process, sometimes they walk themselves out of these weird thoughts. But having that human interaction, really, to get back to the point, is I think something we miss a lot. And it's so much easier just to hate someone when you don't have that face on the other side, or the person right there to talk to.
Especially with, in my mind, something that always gets missed is the whole, I'd say, panoply of like beliefs people have day to day, that I have no idea what would be popular or not in like random takes I have on like different things. But I think, especially when you see someone share an opinion that you might not like, I think the error that I think everyone makes is see that and be like, oh, what a garbage human. And granted, it might be a super garbage take, but I feel like most of the time, if you just met them in real life, you probably be like, this person's fine. And that's not necessarily a whole thing about forgiving everyone for every opinion. Like, yes, you should hold people accountable. Part of the another push that I don't really know how to do this more formally, but at least for me, I try to stand up for the idea that, I mean, we both have worked in esports for a while now. You having obviously much more of a storied career, but like I think it's very familiar with like kids in all esports will be caught out for like being misogynistic, potentially, like being very aggressive towards women in games, or using sometimes like a slur or something, and then people will be like, oh, what's the big deal? These are just words. And I'm like, but the thing is, the best way to combat that, if we can all agree that like these words aren't good to use, it's calling people out and being able to be comfortable to say like, hey, you did this, and I don't think it should ruin your life forever, especially with these young kids who are like 13, and at a certain point they don't know the true gravitas of the word, or if they do, they're just trying to be edgy, and they really mistimed it because they're still trying to like learn how to do everything. And it's like, I think being able to be comfortable, like if your friend said that and said like, yo, it's very fucked up, like don't do that, and just be able to call each other out and be accountable, I think that does wonders. My biggest thing that always strikes me whenever I see those posts about like, I changed my name in Valorant to like Alexis or something to see how I was treated, and there's people that are just railing on this, like what they assume is a woman in their game, and everyone else in the VC is quiet, and I'm like, why is no one being like, hey bro, can you calm the fuck down and just shut up, and can we play the game, like let her play, whatever. Like that's always the thing that bothers me, is one of my favorite quotes is Edmund Burke's like, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I feel like you don't really have to do this massive push. It really just comes down to like small stuff like that, especially if someone's given shitty takes or being super aggressive about it, something. You don't have to like hard check them. Just be like, hey, watch it. Like, be respectful. Like, don't have to do that. And I think you'd be surprised by how often people will start to introspect and be like, why are people constantly yelling at me about this take? Maybe I should examine why that is such a bad thing to do. And I think that's where personality change or behavior change can come from.
People, again, it's kind of what I got to when I was on that tangent there is that people don't listen to people they hate, right? So it's so you always need to have that circle of people around you that you care about saying, hey, that's not cool. Because if you say it to your friend, it might not be immediate. You should also understand you're never going to change someone's mind immediately. They're going to need to go process, think about it. They might do it on their time. People like to come to their own conclusions. So being able to have people around you that you play games with, kind of be like, don't yell at them. Just say, dude, can you not? And then maybe it comes to the point where they don't stop saying, hey man, I don't think we can play together. That you know, at least you've given it time. That person might care about you. They care about your opinion. They care about that loss of a social connection. But if you just immediately, I also just hate the jump on like immediately, as you said, ruining someone's the rest of their life, because I mean, we've all said and done things that are really dumb and stupid throughout our lives, right? I mean, again, I grew up, what words are and not acceptable changed throughout my gaming career too. I was never as insane as some of these people, but obviously, you know, there's a couple things you just say that you're just like, oh, it's I'm 13 and that's fine. But it's, you know, if I just, my life was done over that, I might end up in a hole where I get worse and worse and worse because I'm not around the people that could pull me out of that. I'm around the people that also got ostracized, and now we feel vindicated in continuing down that bad path. So I think it's important to call people out, but not immediately cancel them. Sorry, I had so many ideas coming out at once there. I hope any of that made sense.
No, but I 100% get that, because I mean we circled this idea a lot, but like nothing feels super as good sometimes. It feels like than like dunking on someone on Twitter, like piling on like an unpopular thing and being like, I want to take my quote tweet and I want to do all this stuff. And I feel like there's definitely this element of overdoing it where at a certain point you're so fueled by like the effective like affect, like emotion, like the emotional drive of like, this feels good, to be able to not only, I mean, some people call it virtue signaling. I don't know if it's always like necessarily that being the motivational drive, but like for me, it's like being able to express, this is what I believe in. I condone this. This is bad, blah, blah, blah. And it definitely breaks my heart that in behavioral change, like empirical study, one of the worst ways to change someone's mind is dunking on them. I wish the world existed where you could be like, well, I bet you didn't think about this retort. Bang, and the person's like, I've been defeated, my ideology is shattered, and then they could like go on. I wish that was the way the world worked, but like, yeah, I think if that's actually the hope, I feel like coming at it hyper aggressive is terrible. It looks funny, it's great for retweets or whatever, but it doesn't really work. And I was like, that is pretty devastating. And at least for me, I do definitely wonder sometimes. Rocket League community gets in rows like this all the time, where someone will do something crappy and then people start piling on, and then suddenly you notice like this tweet's getting like thousands and thousands and thousands of likes and retweets and quote tweets, and I'm like, we've reached a point where I feel like the response to this, it was not warranted. It's like I feel like this kid is forever going to be associated with this singular mistake, and it's like, I feel like in my mind, most things in life are like a 2-strike system. Like for me, within like social repercussions, like if you do it once, it's like, hey, let's not do that again. If you do it again, it's like, okay, you have not learned your lesson. Like now you get like the fire and fury. But having some empathy in those situations, I think is huge. But it's so hard to find when you're swept up in, oh, this is so fun to be able to weigh in.
There's so many factors playing into it too. There's one that we talked about, not having that I mean, the one thing about the human interaction that your brain recognizes is the face. That's the thing you recognize as a human being, the face. When you don't have that, it's immediately your brain. There was a study that went on, and where basically they had a bunch of just models in undergarments stand. The first set would just stand like this, arms to the side, just a pose, straight pose. And then another one where those same models would stand, you know, in poses that would accentuate parts of their body that would be considered sexual. And what happened was, in that study, the part of the brain that is active when you're identifying objects over faces was active during the sexual poses. There's literal objectification that happens when people are shown as sexual, because what happened was the brain was no longer focusing on the face. It was focusing on different body parts. So because your brain, those are separate areas, object and face, it was just easier to objectify. And I think that's probably where road rage came. You don't see a face. It's just a car. I can get fucking mad at that thing, right? But the second you look over at that person, at least in me, there's always a piece that's just like, oh, that's a person, right? And the rage drops a little bit. But I think it's easier for that to happen. And same thing online is, you see this opinion from someone, but without that, hey, that's a person thought happening in your brain, You're like, this is an object. I can yell at it. I can be mean, whatever. Then you also have the fact where people drive by, they need their numbers to go up. They need the impressions. They need their likes. And there's so much. And then there's also just, again, the cultural factor of, at least in North America, of online of, oh, everyone is an enemy in this big split, right? So I think so many factors are leading into like, well, yeah, I'll dunk on this person. I won't listen to them. Let's just dunk on them. And I think, yeah, that's it. There's just so many factors going into it.
Yeah,
How do you
that's
fix it?
well, that's the billion dollar question at this point. I don't know if you can necessarily fix it, but I think it just turning the temperature down in the room, I think in my mind is the number one priority. I think a lot of people are like, well, we need to find a way to like really take out prejudice and bias. I'm like, well, it doesn't help that obviously our media diets are very polarized. So it's very much it's not good practice to be like, all right, guys, let's even hand this, even though some news and media will try. So I think that's important, but I do think the human element is really nice because at least for me, like with like the social outrage we talked about especially on like I just like relating back to esports because it's like I used to watch a lot of news and read a lot of news back when I was in school doing political psych, but now I've tried to tune it down a little bit. I try to stay informed, but I don't need to dive headfirst in the pool every time now. That's just depressing. A lot of doom scrolling, but definitely understanding that like everyone who has an opinion different from you also came to it in a completely different manner than you did. For me, definitely the thing that I've noticed the most is watching just like my own father having very aggressive opinions towards certain minority groups or certain like sexual minority groups. And then over time where he just started meeting people like in like, for example, my sister's life, who like one of her best friends came out as bi when I was in like middle school or something. And then him interacting with her was like, oh, wait, this person I super chill with is of that belief. Oh, and the danger is potentially them just being like, oh, but that's an exception. Everyone else I still don't like. But then over time, no, he was like, oh, okay. And then he started like coming around to it. And I feel like people need to understand that that process can be incredibly slow. I think people expecting to just be like, you know, at the end of the day, like, I think it's unnatural that gay people get married. And I think it's unnatural that they exist. And I definitely think that trans people are like mentally diseased. And it's like, whoa, that's awful. Like, you shouldn't say that. But the person coming out of that thought process is going to take a while. And I think people need to have patience. And which is why I think we stress like having those uncomfortable conversations. It's so easy to just be like, you're impossible. Like, I hate you. But like, I think repeatedly hammering that home and trying to at least emphasize, like, I encourage you to look at this, or that's, again, the good and bad of YouTube. I kind of like being able to have like certain videos. Like Vox is something that I always kind of like. They try to do like some deep dives on certain topics. I feel like giving them like a video essay, like a short thing, like, hey, Dad, you love watching the History Channel. This is kind of like a short form History Channel thing. Watch this. And he's able to watch it and he's like, oh, cool. I never thought about it like that. Oh, that's an interesting take. And it doesn't like immediately snap him out of it, but I think it at least makes him much more open. And I feel like as long as that happens, we're getting at least a little closer to the promised land of like not being at each other's throats constantly.
That I kind of touched on it before, saying that like that change won't happen immediately in someone. People need to come to their own conclusions. I mean, I've been told you can be told how to solve a math problem, but we all know that feeling when it finally clicks. You're like, oh, I get it now, right? Someone telling you that won't do it. You have to come to that conclusion. So same thing with the changes you were just mentioning. I mean, to give you an example, and this is why I think patience, and I understand if people don't have patience. I do think that's, I mean, who knows? Maybe these things could be taught, or maybe there's genetics. I mean, some people do genetically get angrier faster, right? But I've grown a lot of patience recently because I've seen people change. So I know it can happen, but I know sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's years before that happens. And so there was recently, I was even streaming when this happened. Someone came into a voice channel. I was playing with someone that wasn't in the Discord immediately. They joined up and just started just yelling the N-word, hard R, just boom, 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 boom. I'm like, hey, whoa, whoa. And, you know, the immediate thought is to ban, get him out, never deal with them again. I said, let me talk to this person. And I said, hey, what's you guys realize that these words hurt people. You realize that, like, what's going on? Come on, talk to me, guys. And I think that immediate, like, non-aggressive demeanor was off-putting to them, they left, and then I think it was a few hours later they came back, did it again, and I just same thing. I talked to them and I said, "What's good? Come on, guys." And a week later, one of the guys messaged me and said, "Dude, I'm so fucking sorry." And I think it was a situation where their friends like, "This would be a good idea," and they joined in, did it, but they messaged me, and said, and it's never happened again from these individuals, and that's obviously not a cool thing, but it's also something that I tolerated for a moment because I knew there's a possibility that tolerance could allow them to reflect on themselves in the long run. And I've seen it happen. It won't always work. And again, you don't know if it's going to work for years to come. But I think enough people doing that and being kind and patient with people will help people in the long run. The more that we all do this for each other, the more we can all end up on an even level sooner than later.
Yeah, I do think that's a fun anecdote, particularly because I like the idea of, especially within, there's like two sides of it where it's like people say really problematic things. And part of it is just like, I am trying to express this and I want you to agree with me. And I'm here to start an argument. Definitely people who've come, because I have a rule, which I break all the time, but I have a rule in my stream that I've had that I'm like, no political talk, nothing too extreme. And granted, that's a very vague term because it's political, but I'm like, well, just vaguely I do that. But of course, if people goad me enough to talk about, my studies and my education and all that, I will get into it to a certain extent and then I'll cut it off. But there are some people who come in and I can tell just by the way they phrase things, the way they retort, it's very much they're here to start an argument. They want to get people riled up. And I think so long as you don't engage with that, I think people tend to, at first they might just be like, oh, look, another coward not willing to take a stand on this issue. Look, blah, 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 and they'll get really uppity about it. But for the most part, yeah, I agree that I feel like there's some people who are there to get a rise out of you and they want to start an argument. But then when you don't engage, it's almost like, oh, that is kind of interesting. Why is that? Why are they not doing that? And granted, some of them don't do that. You might have to ban them. But for the most part, I have actually progressively tried to be like, hey, mods, leave them alone. I want to see what they do. Most of them just leave, but there are some people who have come in and tried to do that. And now they just pop in every once in a while, be like, hey, what's up? I'm like, hey. And it's nice to not necessarily befriend them, but not immediately get the sword out and get super aggressive because there are people who are just genuinely asking and maybe they expect a confrontation or they are trying to be a troll.
Right.
Like I think in your example, and especially when you're younger, not to excuse the behavior, but I think one explanation that we sometimes forget is that words do have meaning, but that abstract notion of what their impact is and historical connotations, I think does get lost. At least for me, when I was younger, the word that I heard thrown around all the time was what I say, the R word, which people might say, just think of it as a synonym for stupid in most people's vocabulary.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, it's not good to say. But back then I felt like it genuinely was just, that's what you use for stupid.
Yes.
And I think when you're younger, it's just like, what's the big deal? When you get older, I felt like that's where I really started clicking ooh, yeah, that's definitely a word that we need to progressively work out of the media diet or of our vocabulary. And I think that stuff does come with time, and it comes from having those very calm conversations.
Yeah, it's in it because I do also agree. Do we get to the point where there's no words we can ever use again because everyone's so I think it's everyone depending on the context you're in. I think that as long as your goal is don't use words that hurt people around people that it hurts first and foremost. If you can work it out of your vocabulary entirely, great. But it's I still hear people. Specifically, I hear people in gamer groups that I'm in use it, and I'll just hey, don't need to be so aggressive with it, whatever. Hey, that word's, just be careful that can hurt some people. But I'm not just immediately don't use it, stop using it. It's just be careful with what you're doing. Think about the words you're outputting and who those words can affect. Again, if you're in a closed group with 3 people and you use it, go for it. I think it'd be too much for me to inject myself into a small group of people and telling them the way their group should operate, right? That's the same, because if we do that, I guess to a larger scale, we run into, again, all the different cultures around the world that do have different ways of life, and some of them conflict. Are any of those groups wrong? Just because they conflict with each other, the way you live your life. I call it the dishwasher scenario. You and I might load the dishwasher differently, but if at the end of the day the dishes get clean, does it really matter? But the way you load it really offends me. It pisses me off, and it makes the rest of my day. Do I have the right to tell you to load the dishwasher differently, or should I just let you operate as long as you're not hurting anyone, and the dishes get clean? Should I still let you operate that way? Right.
I like that analogy. I mean, it's also a good illustration of like how much some people like moralize some things about like, this is not just an opinion. This is objective truths that we're dealing with. If you're putting all the small dishes in the bottom instead of using them with the cups up top, then you're just an unspeakable Neanderthal. Like, I can't even process how you do that. Like that, it's like, we need to back off.
Yeah.
I definitely met a couple people who are like, if you disagree, it's not just like, oh, that's interesting you think that. Like, I don't know how you do that, but blah, blah, blah. And you have like a fun conversation. I definitely had some people who are like, what are you doing with like everything? And I'm like, you're exhausting. Like, this is just, how do you live your life this high strung about all topics?
Yeah, that's a lot. So then to cap that conversation, is social media, in your opinion, a problem?
I think it's a tool.
Okay.
I don't think tools are inherently bad. It's
but
how
do you think it does more damage to the greater world than it is helping?
I think it's the reason I say it's a tool is because we've never, just the thought process when you rewind 50 years of being able to say anywhere in the world you can contact someone pretty much anywhere within seconds, and you can hear them instantly. Like, the idea behind that is like so inspirational, but obviously, you know, it's used in atrocious ways at times, but it's also like a lot of beautiful stuff, and maybe like a positive influence in a negative situation. Like, I think in the US, the most jarring thing for me was people are saying, oh man, why is there so much police brutality in the US all of a sudden? And I'm like, I don't think that it's all of a sudden. It's just now you can just at any time be like, I am recording this in high def. Like, you can always have a camera in your pocket that has pretty good audio capture, has pretty good video capture. So it's like, I think that's a thing where it's like, oh, that can do a lot of good.
Right.
Obviously, extremism, it can do a lot of bad. But ultimately, I think using social media is fine. I'm never going to be the person to be like, you disconnect completely. I think moderating it is a lot.
Be careful with
you have to remember that social media, and when I say you, the figurative you,
yes.
For people listening, I think if there's one takeaway I can stress more than anything else is that social media is built for people to be able to keep you on the site for as long as possible. And a great way to do that is to show you content that upsets you or content that drives engagement. And oftentimes that is stuff that could be positive. I mean, granted, there's definitely people with feeds that are only puppies, rainbows, like feel good videos. But for a lot of other people, it will be argument inducing content. Mm-hmm. It'll be hot takes. It'll be all these things. And I think being aware of that and being willing to have those decompression days. I know some people have called it like a dopamine detox of like just having a day where you just like don't check noties or something, just kind of chill, do something else, read a book, watch a show or something, and just not engage with social media. I think those are important because you definitely overestimate how much time you spend on it. But I would say much more importantly, how much being on certain sites and being in certain message boards and engaging with certain content affects literally your brain chemistry, but on a more macro level, just how you interact with the world. And I think if you want things to, not to say improve, not saying get off social media, but be incredibly wary about what your perspective is and how much you are influenced by things that feel like, oh, I'm just scrolling on a website, and when it's so much more than that.
Yeah, no, I think the awareness, and this is something that I think really school curriculums really need to get on. I mean, they're already so slow at adopting and changing, but I really think that earlier on our primitive I guess our instincts that our brain goes to, again, just like tribalism or like how it operates your brain. This is how dopamine and serotonin, this is how it operates. Earlier on, it needs to be done, or at least little bits If I think if you put that into a grade, like try to teach someone a grade 5, that they'll not pay attention very quickly if it's too long. But like just keeping those conversations alive throughout a child's career, education, a child's
educational career. I mean, it all comes together
through that course. I think is important because if it's just an ever present conversation that's being had, I think it sticks. It's going to stick with people long term a lot more. It's the same thing with like over time. Don't teach a kid for 30 minutes once a week for an entire year. Do it, inject these things into conversations in other courses throughout 10 years. And all of a sudden we're more aware as a animal, how our animal instincts are operating. We just don't do that enough in school at all, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of gaps. I mean, I could go on and on about the education, about like education system and like and how much we miss, but that's also just like a whole different thing. I definitely feel like as long as
it's a future podcast.
That's also, I mean, that's also just like a thing with parenting. I think definitely the term iPad kid is like one of my favorite in new inventions of like witnessing like how many people were grown up and just being like, here's just a screen, which I don't even shame parents who do that, because like 100% I get it. 2, yeah, kids would like that, and it's kind of, I think, naive to assume that you can completely disconnect your kid from the internet, like, and have no interaction with it. Like it's a beast. It'll find its way into any aspect of your life, but
there is a lack of moderation going on.
Yes, and I think it's hard because you also don't want to be the morality police and be like, this website is bad and like you shouldn't visit this at all and you should do this and there's no good things about it. But I would say I don't even know how you'd fit it in necessarily. Like it would almost feel like
I don't know. If I have a kid and they're on their iPad and they're 6 years old and they're browsing QAnon website, I might say, hey, let's chill on those for a
minute. No, I mean like for like education, like you don't want to take a stance of like this website is always bad or something like that. But with parenting, I definitely feel like, you need to be aware of it because especially with like the QAnon stuff, like that is where I think you can really get some tough things going on and part of that is just feeding into a pipeline of like, this would be convenient to think, and therefore, but that's, I don't know, it's definitely a weird time, and it produces some, I still say though, the moment I realized my father and I were ideologically different was I was packing up my mattress after I graduated college, and this is like not to date me, but this is like 2017. I graduated college.
Okay.
And so,
dude, I didn't graduate. I dropped out. It was 2008. So you're
like, I actually want to come back to that, but like, like I was wrapping my mattress to put in the moving van to move to Arizona for my first lab job out of college, and I was watching Fox News because my dad had it on, and in that moment, there was a runoff election, which basically means like someone in the U.S. Senate or House of Representatives, I want to say it's Senate, was not able to finish their term. So they just need to find a new senator real quick. So they hold like a mini election to kind of replace them as quickly as possible. And the Republican candidate for that was essentially like days before the election. He ended up getting interviewed by this reporter who apparently was like very much kind of like known for being dogged and saying like, hey, like, what do you think about this? Hey, you didn't answer that question. Please get back to me. I'd like the answer. And apparently the Republican candidate got so upset that he like pushed the guy down and like broke his glasses and like was yelling at him and like apparently kept like harassing him and maybe like pushing him with his foot away from him. And in my mind, I'm like, that's assault. Like you just like push down a member of the press. You hurt them. Like the guy's recording it. It's all in audio, but he's like, it's all this stuff. And I remember seeing that and being like, wow, that's so wild to see. And I just laughed. And my dad's like, yeah, I mean, I got to say, like, those news media, they have it coming sometimes. And I'm like, expand on that, Dad. And more or less, he started to just talk about it. He's like, yeah, I think it would be better if more politicians were more aggressive toward the media. I think if they're going to come up in my space, yeah, you might deserve a right hook. And I was just like, just like those moments of like in my head, I'm like on fire. I was like, I can't even process how that works, but I definitely think like tiny stuff like that is like it's interesting how we engage with those dynamics, and maybe that's a generational difference. But I do find that I always found that so funny.
I can also see
that moment was like,
it's just like, okay, hold up, this is. I could see it being a bit of a disconnect on realizing that someone that's a politician is in a different position than your average person, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I still don't think you should hurt someone in any situation here, but if someone is up in your grill, there's less. If someone is, say for instance, paparazzi is just suddenly in your face, there's, I don't know, some sort of precedent to be like, come on, get out, like physically moving them.
Yeah.
Because they know what they're doing. They're trying to do that, and I think maybe there should be some lenience to them be able to do that. But I'm not going to like right hook someone. But also, a politician is putting themselves in a position where politicians are public service workers. These are people that serve. I think reporters are necessary to making sure that balance and corruption is called out if it exists there. I think reporters get a pass. I think they have a higher priority on being able to ask those questions to a public service worker. A politician should understand that they're signing that I am a public service worker at this point. I will be critiqued and I will be asked these questions. And when you go in with that understanding, I don't think you really then have the right to then push someone over.
That was my take, and I tried to explain. It was basically like, because when I see someone like get like into a fight or something after being like bullied or something, my first thought is like, good for them, like
Right.
in like a person-to-person interaction. But I do feel like there are some people where it's like you don't get that right because you're supposed to be kind of like the role model, like you're supposed to be like the
willingly
person
sign that away.
that
Yes.
demonstrates that. And also I find it hilarious that politicians get into politics and then they're like, why is the media all over me? Because that's the whole point of the job is to ask you questions and get to know what you're voting on, what your support is, what the platform is. And it's so funny to me to see people get like confrontational, like, how dare you ask me what I meant by that last big phrasing? It's like, that's their whole job is to get your opinion. But I don't know, like, that sounds really funny, but I do. You said something that piqued my interest because it reminded me.
I was going to call back to that.
You had mentioned like, like I like didn't finish college. Like I didn't have that
4
education.
years, then I had three courses left to graduate, and I said, I don't know if I'm feeling this. I go travel Europe with my buddy quick.
Yes, and that's the thing I want to touch on because that's actually something in the whole myriad of friends that I've like met or people I've met in esports. That's like a very common story.
Very common in esports.
Like incredibly common, where like the traditional life path of like you go to high school, you graduate, you go to college, you get your degree, you work in a job, and then you go. Like, obviously, I'm sure first of some of the suits, like that's probably exactly what they did. They probably went to business school and then they went on from there. But for especially esport talent, you realize like you can probably be, I would say the closest thing you can be is like on-air broadcast communications or like journalism focus.
There's not really
But
anything,
outside of that, I really don't think there's an education that when people ask, like, I've had people in college be like, what courses should I take to prep? I'm like, I was in psych. I went to a PhD program for psych, and part of that is public speaking, like in conferences,
Radio?
but like it's not a focus. Yeah, it's like radio, maybe radio, but like ultimately, yeah, you don't really get trained for that. Why do you feel like that's such a common thing that people in esports find their way there after trying like the educational route and then just usually dropping out? Of the common thing is that exact thing.
I think there's as with everything, there's a few factors in my opinion that would lead to this. I mean, generally to be to dedicate your time to something unproven and so stressful means you really have to care about it, or have something wrong with your head, and that's probably my case. But it's because it is. I mean, like constantly, even when I had longer contracts with RLCS, they're still year long, and that's it. After that year, I don't know. Am I being brought back, right? And so these, there's always that stress, but it's because it's something that I really, really enjoyed. It was kind of worth it to put myself through it. So I think specifically the commentary side, like the on-air talent side of things, I think it's also just attracts more exaggerated personalities in general, people that usually all are already outside of that maybe standard path you would follow. So I think that's one contributing factor. The other one is, again, that we see this thing that we really like. We're doing that traditional path, and we're like, but there's a small opportunity for it. Now, granted, my opportunity came well after I had dropped out. To me, it was just I was doing computer programming and slash analyst, so it was more of like business programming. I wanted to make games, so the gaming was my thing, and I realized that this course wasn't quite there. Sure, it was getting the fundamentals, but I stopped enjoying someone telling me what to make. I just wanted to make. So I'm wondering if that is a big factor that the people end up in this atmosphere are more creatives and don't really work well in that routine. They need to have ideas just flow when they flow, and then being stuck in that routine, it's like it just feels uncomfortable. It's like I'm being told what to make here. I want to just go make something. Let me do that. So that's why I needed that break. I traveled Europe with my friend. I said, I need my space. I need to break out of the routine. And then I worked in the bars for a couple of years. I started running some esports stuff in the bars, some local tournaments, and then that's what eventually led the path here. But it was because then I could operate those things on my own space, my own time. I think maybe that's probably what a lot of it is you generally esports attracts those creatives on the talent side that don't work well in that linear path.
I can definitely see that. Because that was the refrain I always got with people where, especially in the collegiate space, it's always made me laugh. Like we doing a collegiate broadcast and someone would mention like going to school, and then we're like, oh, Jeff, like you have your degree, you have your like graduate degree or whatever. But I dropped out, and then someone else is like, yep, I also did. It's like, yep, I also didn't go to college. And it was just like, it's funny how like frequent that does pop up. But I do definitely think that one, esports casting also feels like one of those careers you stumble into.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of people when they're like 8, like I want to be a caster growing up. I guarantee there's people like that.
There are now.
At least for me, when I talk to a lot of people, like, what'd you want to be growing up? A lot of people are like, oh, I wanted to be, a doctor. I want to be whatever. I want to be any number of careers. But esports casting for me was just something I stumbled into. And I think the reason it gripped me as much as it did and why I'm doing this full time now is that the big question that we always get asked, and I do think it's very unfair to put this on kids who are not even 18, is like, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? Decide. You're going to college right now. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know. And then you ask adults, like, how do you choose? And for me, I went to psych. I did 4 years of that. I did 2 years in Tucson working in a lab, managing a lab, getting paid by the Army to do things to keep them emotionally healthy. And then went to graduate school for 4 years. And I think a lot of it was just because it's like, well, I know what I like and what I'm interested in. And that's half of it. But I think also another thing is knowing what your strengths and tendencies are and using a job that facilitates all those. And for me, like throughout all my life, I love being a tour guide. I loved being able to like talk to people. In my college, I signed up to be a tour guide. So I think it was kind of like stand up in a way. You could crack jokes and be funny and be like that empathetic ear to all these students. Like I was where you were. Like I know your concerns. Then also tell a story, present something, you're performing, you're being like having that human connection, you're being a comedian. And then I also like teaching at my college. I signed to be a TA as fast as possible. In graduate school, you teach all the time, like solo classes and also as part of like just a grading and kind of like office hours thing. But I like being a source of information. Like I like being able to use analytical ability to break things down. I TA'd statistics a lot for the undergrads at my graduate school. And I think as I've casted longer and longer, it started like back when I just graduated out of college as just like a fun thing. But then I realized like casting and talent work is all of those things combined. Right. It's being analytical. It's being able to break down complex things into simpler structures. You have to be an entertainer. You have to be a good public speaker. You have to be kind of that emotional through line to say like, this is a narrative that the viewer might not grasp. I'm going to bring that in, digest it, and then spit it out into a way that creates kind of this connection to the audience that they might not have by passively viewing just a regular broadcast. And I think all of that combined, I'm like, it does feel like when people connect with this, I think people say, this is what I was born to do. I think this is really like my calling. I've talked to Bass in the past about this, like one of my best friends in casting. That was very much his take. And it's because I do feel like it combines all those things about your personality and your behavior and then puts it in a job. And it's like, that is what you do. Like you don't need any other qualifications. Someone could just have no other education, but if they're a good public speaker and they have a presence, then you can make a difference. And I always kind of like that.
I think it's I figured it out. It's ego. We just want people listening to us.
I mean, that's part of it. I feel like no one would get it and be like, no one wants to listen to me. Like those people don't go far because there is like an arrogance you have to have as a talent in a little bit.
Interesting on that, because I also do. It's gotten better as I gotten older, but I still do have depression, and that thought process is real for me. A lot of times, it's like why would people want to listen to me over these other? I'm surrounded by so many talented people. They're just so. I actually hold myself back from making a lot of content because there's. I've been trying to vlog a lot more recently, and it's so hard for me because I'm like, I feel like a dick running around with a camera. Like, look at me. This is, and it's very hard for me because I'm like, no one wants to see this. But then I've tried a couple of vlogs. I'm like, oh, these actually turned out okay. But you can tell I'm still holding back. And so seeing the other side of it, I get it now. But it definitely, I do feel like it has held me back in terms of creating content. A lot of times, I think that's why my brand isn't as powerful as some of the other commentator brands out there, because it's hard for me.
I also do think that it's incredibly brutal to the last thing I want to contend is if there's any like aspiring commentators or something. My biggest thing for me is how much to use an industry term, the meta of commentating has changed, in that it really in the heyday was like you have to be, I would say, almost an entrepreneur. Like, this is the event I want to run. And I kind of want to package it. I'm probably going to take a pay hit, but like I just want to get something going. And that's I feel like what a lot of MLG was. I think esports to this day, F dot used to always tell me, like, whenever we talk, like, esports runs on passion. It's 100% people who just like, I really want this to have an audience, and I want people to view this. I think it's so important that we do this. And as the business started coming in, then obviously it is competitive because casting is subjective at its core. Like, there's objective parts of it, like almost like you're grading a rubric. How much passion do they have? How well spoken are they? Do they have a great voice? Like, can they connect with people? I think that's a huge thing that you do very well as an interviewer. Like, I think the way you engage with pros, obviously because of the history you have, the way you ask questions, like how you like engage like more informally and mix informal, like all that can be like graded in a way, but there's no way to do that. So it's like, how do you separate yourselves from the rest of the talent? And the modern answer is like, you can't be a commentator. You have to be a commentator, a public voice, a community staple. You have to create content. You have to also create other content potentially. But if your game isn't big enough, Rocket League's kind of running into that one right now, I think, with people's kind of exhaustion with the content cycle of like, how do I make videos stand out? It's incredibly hard.
That's why the only RL content I do is this. And it's
exactly, because it's interesting. There's a very much the idea of like, you get to know people that you don't know, and that's why I love watching these types of videos, or really any podcast in the RL space, because it shows a different side. But I definitely think that's the frustrating thing, is that when people DM me all the time about, like, because I had a post a while back on my friend Vaudable, shout out Vaudable, he has a whole Discord for casters that's like a community space. And one of the huge things that I always say is like, I'm a mentor role in that. And it's like, if you want to DM me about questions, the questions I get DM'd all the time are like, how do I get more gigs? And I'm like, the hard part is that you can cast a lot, but you also need to be so much more than just a voice. And that's, I think, one of the most frustrating things nowadays is you do have to overcome that exact thing that you talked about. Like, why would people listen to my voice? And at least for me, the realization was like, I used to be like, I don't know what to tweet, because I feel like the moment I started typing out, I'm like, this was stupid. Does anyone want to read this? Like, does anyone find enjoyment out of that? And then I slowly realized, like, especially through stream as well, I'll play random games, and I'm like, do you guys enjoy this? Do you just want me to play Rocket League? They're like, hey, I'm here because I want to watch you. And the game is like dressing. Like, at the end of the day, like, you connect with the personality. And same with tweets. I'll tweet stupid bullshit, and people are just like, yeah, that's fun. I engage with that because, like, at the end of the day, that's what you have to be. And I feel like overcoming that hurdle of understanding that, like, it's not always about you have to change the world with every tweet or video you put out. You just have to put yourself out there, and I think people will gravitate to you, because people who succeed in the industry, I think, are people who are good at communicating with people and connecting.
This is why I really put a focus recently on my Discord, and just being there. Like, sometimes I'll just sit in the voice channel, and if someone wants to come hang out and chat while I'm editing or something, they can, because I think interacting like that is again something I was failing at building. I'm like, I don't think people want the, why would people, they'll just go to another Discord, they'll go somewhere, they'll hang out with someone else, they don't care about my stuff. So I was putting some of my stuff out into a vacuum. Sometimes I was just, I'd make a video on YouTube, but I'm not telling anyone that I just did it anywhere else. Now videos on YouTube can operate on their own, right? They don't need outside influence, but at least to start that foundation, or the community around your brand was something I was failing to succeed at, because I just, again, like, nobody cares about this. So why would I? And then when I do tweet wild shit, I get everyone in the RLCS community blocked by reporters. that was me.
Yeah, it's fun.
Do you know that? The Richard
I've
Lewis
heard.
one.
Yeah, I've heard. I do remember that. That was an interesting moment for sure. That was like a badge of honor for a while. Like, oh, are you banned by Richard Lewis, and then later by Thorin? And like, yeah, I am. It's like, all right, dope. Like, let's go.
Yeah. Oops. That was.
Which is a shame, because I think the general take that people should have is Richard Lewis is an incredible writer. I love all his pieces, but I don't think I'd ever want to hang out with him.
Yeah.
In that regard.
Again, this is actually literally the first time I've brought that up on air, I think, ever, because I'm just like, okay, this is a lot, guys. Let's take a step back here from both sides, from everybody. I had an opinion you didn't agree with. Let's leave it at that.
It's a weird take. That's also the funny thing, is just like, you just be like, about how many times I've just made a tweet being like, this will be fun to put out, and then I find out, I'll come back to sometimes I'll tweet stuff and go to bed and wake up, and then the replies are just like, I can't believe this, and it starts like a whole engagement. There's like threads of like 15 back and forths going down the line, and I'm like, this was not my intent, but I guess it's good that people are fired up about it. It's good to make a conversation, I suppose, but
yeah,
I definitely feel that.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get out there more. It's hard, because it just constantly being engaged in so many things sometimes is exhausting, and it does make it hard to just to circle way back to what we said, is being able to have those dopamine detox days. Is because when I sit down to play a game on my PlayStation on my couch, I feel like I'm a failure, because I'm not generating content right now. I'm not. I should be showing this to people. I should be editing a video instead. I should be streaming. I should be so many other things, and then I guilt trip myself. So now the whole time I'm playing, I'm like, I should be doing, and I'm not really immersing myself in those moments. I've gotten better at it recently, but it is very difficult when you have a role like this.
As much as so many people in esports are very progressive and very much like not anti-work necessarily, but pretty much like at that level of like grind cultures, just slaughtering the human mentality and all of our brains. Everyone is susceptible to it, because the thing is, you are not immune to propaganda. So there's definitely a lot of people who will say like, oh yeah, it's important to be careful of burnout. And yet a bunch of people in the industry that I'm best friends with will be like, I'm going to take a personal day. And then later in the day, they're texting group chat like, I feel so lazy right now. And I'm like, you are relaxing. Just take a single day off. They're like, but I have to edit stuff and I can't believe it. And I'm like, I literally dropped out of grad school because of that exact reason, where I felt so burnt out that the grad school basically asked me, like, if you try to do both things, like if you try to do
you'll be done.
Commentary and also school, like that's not good enough. Like, no, absolutely not. And I was like, I'm going to keep trying because I want to do both. And they said that's not good enough. But then but rewinding, when I think back about that, it's always in a positive, hit my mic. But like, it's always a positive thing now, because it's like, part of the reason I hated my life so much in grad school is because you're balancing a trillion things. And if anyone's ever had a salaried job or been a content creator or something, there's never like off shift. Because technically, yes, you could always be productive. There's always something to edit. There's always something to script. There's always something to record and edit. If you're uploading something, even off that, you have to be on Twitter. So for some people to be active, get impressions up, and it's a huge thing. Like on a psychological level, people get into those hobbies because they have an intrinsic interest. They genuinely like it. But when you turn it into a business or in a routine or something that you have to do, it turns it into extrinsic. You're going for something that is outside of your passions. And I think that's the really dangerous balance, where I never want to reach that point where I've lost the passion, which is why one of the hardest things is finding exactly that, like not diving too deep into anything that I'm interested in and trying to like optimize my whole life, because I realize that's the moment I start to have my depressive episodes and start to retreat and start to get really like angry and bad tempered, because I realized, wait, the whole reason I got into being my own boss with like content creation and with casting is because I can set my schedule. And if I am so burnt out that just the thought of editing makes me want to throw my computer out the window, then I don't have to.
Right.
Being much more forgiving about that has been like life changing for my mental health.
It's hard because it also goes the other way with ADHD, is that if I don't set goals, then I won't do it. So
That is a good point.
so yeah, I did tell myself I need one, because my main channel is my Star Citizen channel. Because again, it's doing RL content. No, I need to
Love that RL content.
So I said one video a week. I'm gonna say video a week, even if it's just an opinion piece. And I had to start telling myself each video won't be perfect, but as I will learn one thing or get better at one skill every time I put a video every week. Let's just do that. Sometimes it's me just talking about a thing for 4 minutes and just throwing on random footage underneath it. Doesn't even really relate, but it's just gameplay. Because I was always so perfectionist. I'm like, every single piece, if I'm talking about something, the video needs to support it. And then I would go spend 3 hours in the game getting a 3-second clip that to support that thing I said, when I'm like, you know what, I can just skip this one. Let me skip this one. Because I don't do camera. I'm thinking about doing camera, but I don't do camera. That is a space you could fill with your face talking to the camera, but I don't do that, so I needed footage. But teaching myself that, you know, it's okay to have these small imperfections here and there, I think came from also learning how to play video games without completing them on the first run through. So many games are checklists now, like Horizon, or all these games, like these AAA games. Spider-Man is like, he was like, oh, I can 100% complete it on my first playthrough. I have to 100% complete it on my first playthrough. And then it becomes a chore. It becomes a checklist. So games like, this is why I really like, I started to appreciate games like Skyrim a little more, where I'm like, it's okay if I don't do everything on my first playthrough, because it makes the game feel bigger, better, and also unique. My playthrough feels special to me now. And I'm like, you know what? It's okay to not make it's okay to not be perfect is what that really taught me. And that translated into video editing too, because I said, you know what, it's okay if this 1 3-second clip kind of isn't relevant to the thing I was saying, because of the rest of the video, most of it is. So that helped me be able to enjoy the editing process more, because I would hit those stumps of like, well, I need this 3-second clip, but it's going to take me 2 hours to get into Star Citizen, travel to the planet, get the thing. I'll do it tomorrow. And then I wouldn't, right? So not being perfect helped a lot.
Perfect is the enemy of good.
Yes.
I think. And that's actually, for all you younger people watching this, if you're in job interviews, you'll probably ask, what's your biggest weakness? I've learned that my dumb cliche answer is actually the accurate one is, no, 100%. I'm like, I definitely have an issue with overthinking. Like, that should be better. I can refine that. That intro doesn't hook people. Like, I need something better than that. But then the issue is like, ugh, if that hooks people, maybe the intro's too long, and then the retention graph is going to drop off on the video. And so now I have to do something else. And you're just constantly doing through this. And it's like the best advice routinely, if you ask any, I would say, experienced content creator, is exactly what you described. Like, you need to just put it out. Like, it will get better in time, and not everything is going to be a work of art. Like, even in like really good content creators nowadays that everyone regards like amazing, you look at their earlier videos and they're much like rougher around the edges, because the only way to learn is just throw it out there, see the reaction, and then implementing that and learning and getting better at it. And I think that's a very hidden curriculum of content creation, or just being online and putting things out in a more formalized manner anyway, is you just learn over time without realizing that you're actually like getting an education indirectly.
Well, it's like anything, to any skill. I mean, you play Rocket League, sure, there's some things you practice specifically at, right? But overall, you're probably way better than you were when you first started playing, even a year after. Like, you just constantly have gotten better and better. And if you maintain your rank, that means you're getting better, because everyone else around you is also getting better. If you rank down, you might be stagnating, but that's why climbing ranks is very, very difficult, because you have to get better faster than everyone else. But what was I gonna say? I just ADHD'd out of that thought so hard. Where was I going with this? I was going to, just learning over time. Just essentially agree with you that it's over time, and that Mr. Beast was right too. You just have to. It'll take you 100 videos before you know what you're doing. You just have to just make 100 videos, And every time you'll probably just be like, ooh, I want to try to make this transition on this video. Well, that's one new thing you just learned, right? You don't have to do it on every video, but you just learned one new thing on the third video or something. And for me, it was like, I'm actually very happy. Like my retention is really good now. Like my retention used to drop to like 30, 40 in my early videos. And now I can keep my retention anywhere between 60 to 80.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like it's honestly super solid retention because I've gotten really good at just making those first 30 seconds feel like 2 seconds to people. They get hooked. They know what's on. They immediately, they're like, I know where I'm going. I've got this. Here's the premise. Let's go. And then the next thing I had to learn is not getting too micro. Once you get those little things, not getting too micro about too many things though. You just overall have to look at it and say, is this a video people want to watch? Is this a topic worth talking about? And do I care about talking about it? Or am I just making it because like, well, that's what someone else talked about? Just look at that macro sometimes really helps as well. Like what is the video? What am I trying to accomplish here? Okay, now I have a clear vision of what needs to be put out.
I particularly like the idea of a lot of advice when people are like, I want to get into streaming. What should I do? I feel like a lot of like the think piece articles I hear on this are like, choose an incredibly small community because you could be a big fish in a small pond. And that's like correct in a way, but I think you've stumbled into like a really nice thing with Star Citizen in that you can actually be a creator who loves the game and wants to spread the news and proselytize or whatever about like all
Join
these
the
things.
cult.
Yeah, and get all into it, but also care about the product of being able to like say, in a way, this is like marketing game. I want to succeed, but like also talk about things in the game and that I find interesting, get my opinion out there, get people to know me. I think that has created great retention. I think something similar is I love Souls likes, specifically Dark Souls and Elden Ring, Bloodborne. Those are some of my favorite games of all time. I still put them in like my pantheon of like top games. And the content creators in that space have insane retention because the people who get into those games, obviously a lot of people will in passing be like, oh, have you heard of Star Citizen? Yeah. You ever heard of like all these other games? They'll say like, yeah, I know of it. But the people who are like super into it are like addicted. There's a YouTuber I love called Zully the Witch, who's a modder who does pretty much all FrontSoft games. But basically she takes game code and they're like, oh, like, this is something that tells you about the lore of the game, which if anyone's ever played a Souls like, or not a Souls like Dark Souls games or Elden Ring, you don't know anything about the story. It's very indirect. You can play the whole game and be like, what did I just do? Like what was that about? But if you dive really deep, there's a lot into it. And she basically just has these like short little videos like, hey, I found this string of game code. The way this object is labeled reveals that it might be related to this other object. And since we know this person is
that's fun.
The son of this god, then what does that mean about what was intended? That might be in the story, might have been this way. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. And then when I look at the like detailed stats, it's like people are like addicted to these videos. Like they stay like 99% all the way through these videos. And I feel like that's like a cool thing about YouTube as well is people talk about going down a YouTube rabbit hole and watching these super vague videos, and you look at the views and there's like millions of views on it. And you're like, how does this happen? It's because literally no matter what, if you have an interest in something, I think the poison people get into is, especially with content creation, like mass content creation. Oh, I have to play Call of Duty. I have to play these massive games. I have to be a just chatter and be like hyper dynamic and have a great outfit out and makeup and all this stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, you can find a massive or pretty decent audience that, if you're successful enough, can fund your lifestyle off of anything, so long as you love what you're doing and just
the thing they love.
do it. Yeah. And it's crazy. That always has blown my mind that there's whole channels that can afford it. Like Lockpicking Lawyer. The fact that channel exists and is that successful is mind blowing. I just always imagine like being in a conference room and being like, all right, guys, we have an idea for a content series. So it's a man, you only see his hands, and he picks locks. And he's also a lawyer. That's not relevant at all, but he picks locks on camera. And picking lock is majority of the video. No, it's actually a very small amount of the video because he's so good at it. Most of the video is him explaining the backstory of how he got the lock. And you're like, what a weird topic. And then every video, like within 30 minutes of uploading, 1 million views. Like, it's like, I swear, like it has like such a quick uptake. It's really fun to watch. I watch like 20-minute videos of him explaining solving a puzzle lock that he got sent by like a game company. And I'm like, I don't know why, but like just weird. I suppose the word is niche, like areas are fascinating to me. And that's one of my things I love about content creation. It can really be about like anything.
Which is so interesting too, because like I don't really have any intention of picking locks myself.
Right? Exactly. But it's just, it's just inherently interesting to me that I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. I haven't thought about how locks work. And this guy's just like, and there's something also just to like hearing experts go through the thought process. That's catnip for me. I love the Wired interviews. Yeah. They talk to like the former CIA chief of like Disguise about like how to critique things and be like, oh, this is what we used to do. Like listening to an expert break something down. That's the bread and butter of why React is interesting to me. Is like hearing the nuances of like, oh, you might see this, but I sees this, and I'm like, oh, like I could watch those for days. I love that content.
Yeah, no, that's I agree. I think and this is why it's like, yeah, just it's important to really enjoy what you're making too. Back to what you're saying is like but I also, again, I still have to make sure I have deadlines for stuff, because if I just say, oh well, I'll only make a video when I want to, I never will. But making it on something is so important, and that making that decision to convert my channel to like something that uses this, that's something I'm still trying to figure out. It uses the same branding as my Rocket League stuff, but it's completely different content. So I really wonder if there's a problem with that transfer, because it's like if people go searching LiefX, do they find Star Citizen content, not click it, now my CTR drops? You know,
I get so wrapped up with that as someone who, I don't know about you, but I always have, I don't want to use the word fixations because I think that's too extreme a word. Okay. But I've always been very focused in my video game interests. Like growing up, it was like I played Call of Duty like 90% of the time. Yeah. Like I would play with my friends. It was social activity. But even after they stopped playing, I was still just trying to pub stomp as much as possible, get like a high KD. I spent weeks, I remember, just trying to get my KD in Modern Warfare 3 up to 4.0. I was so close. Yeah. And I was just a DGen gamer in my basement every day. But people are like, oh, have you played this new game? Have you played this new game? I'm like, nope. And I just have no interest because I'm like, I have my one game. I love this. This is how I spend my time. I want to, and maybe that's a perfectionist drive, trying to optimize like how good I am. Rocket League very much scratches that now. Yes. Especially because of the no RNG thing. I think they've captured lightning in the bottle for that concept alone. But I always struggle to play other stuff. But now it's like myself, Widow has tweeted about this before. I know Jamaican Coconut has tweeted about this more recently. It's a terrifying thing to like be known for something, do a bunch of things in this genre, and then suddenly be like, I want to do something else. But then you're wondering, do people care? Do I make a new channel? Yeah. Or do I potentially pollute my current audience and give people stuff they don't want for the risk of like other people coming on in? And then I think that's why people create different channels, because they're too scared to like ruin that CTR, because you don't want people clicking on it being like, oh, what's this? Oh, and then click off and the YouTube's like, this is a terrible video. But in reality, it's just your current audience is not like ready for that, because that's not what they sub to you. And it's like, I think I do wish creators were more willing, myself included to a certain point, to be willing to experiment with content, because I do think that, yes, the danger of not being a variety streamer from the very get-go is that you are branded as this, and then suddenly when you go off-brand, people are like, you've changed, what is this? And it's like, I'm not. I have surprisingly the only video game I play is not just this. Like I play other stuff, and I definitely feel you on that, where it's like, how are people going to react to that? And at a certain point, it's like, who cares? Let's find out. Like, let's like see.
Well, I'm thinking of just keep it just a central Twitter is a LiefX, and then that X just becomes the place. You know, maybe I'll change my YouTube to LiefSC. This one is LiefXRL. I might just change it to LiefRL. Now it's just a placeholder for everything I want to do with different channels. But I did start a channel. I didn't tell anyone about it. Doesn't use any of my brand. It does technically have my face, but it's got like emojis on and stuff. No one watching it would know it was like, you wouldn't stumble across it. Immediately the videos, I suddenly found a niche, one of those games where people really care. And my videos in just 5,000, 10,000 views, just right off the bat, immediately. Yeah, the game was Outward. Have you heard of Outward?
Yes. Yeah, I want to make sure I'm thinking the right ones. I'm just going to Google this. But
it was
yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've definitely been seeing that on. It keeps getting recommended to me on Steam. 100%. Canadian studio.
Yeah, it's really good. It's very hardcore. RPG. Like it's like every 2 minutes you'll get attacked. Like if you get attacked by something, oh, now all of a sudden you have a disease. Oh, now you got to go make a tea to be able to get across. Oh no, it's snowing out. Now you're not wearing the right clothes. It's like very hardcore. But it's really cool because of that. There's a lot of depth to it. But yeah, I just found this audience that really cared about it, and it was just me trying the game with my friend, and they're like, "This is real." They love seeing new players trying stuff, and so it's cool. Yeah, I think, but I don't think that would have worked if I made it on my channel, my main channel, at all.
It's the biggest battle, especially when you're trying to brand yourself as something. I mean, tangentially, this is also why I don't even know if this is good advice. It just, for me, like based on my own observations, I feel like this is a thing. I've seen a lot of commentators say that they are multi-game casters, but they'll say, I can cast anything. Val, Rocket League, Overwatch, da-da-da. And the issue with not specializing in something is that I think you're just seen as like a generic caster. Because I think the reason why people love certain casters, like they're known as like the voice of these one or two games. I don't know too many casters who are general, like I can do anything. And even if they are, they're usually hosts or like analysts or something.
I think the only person soon, but he's not even going to be competent. I think there's one guy that can transcend all games though, because he's done his own thing. It's Stacks. I feel like Stacks is the only guy now that can transcend anything, because you don't hire him as someone to talk about the game. You hire him because of what the presentation that he puts out, right?
And that's why that's one thing that I definitely think if you're good at being a presenter, host, stage. I remember some host. I don't want to miscredit this. I want to say it was Belly a while back. He said like, I don't even have to be like an expert.
Right.
It's really just about knowing how to lead conversation and how to best use my desk and use my talent. And I always thought that's really interesting as someone who like has been asked to host stuff before, and I'm like, I need to memorize everything, and I'm like, actually, part of my job is to like participate in the conversation, so you don't want to be just like a dullard, just like know nothing, and
you still need to know what questions to ask.
Yeah, but the same thing, like being able to tap into that and use your analysts correctly and let them be like the presence. I think in a way, being like out of the spotlight as a host and just like introing, using analysts, and then kind of like seamlessly going between, that makes you look so much better than like a host that tries to be like a major figurehead of the desk. And I found that really interesting. But being able to like not just focus in on one thing and be able to say like, or rather being able to focus in on one or two things that you're very good at, and then tangentially being like, and more, like I can also do these other things, because I definitely think, at least for me, it's hard for me to recommend any individual for a game if I don't know what they're good at. And I feel like that's the strength of being a single game or like a duo cast, or where you can kind of dial in on that. And I think with content creation, to go back to the main point, it's something similar in that I think being able to specialize in something and having like a singular focus, it has its strengths, but I think you should also play into you know, everything that you're capable of doing. So being able to do like a second channel, I mean, that's like, has to be such a ego gratifying moment of like, oh, so it is my skills that are like causing this, like, because I just went to come up with something completely random with no inertia from my former brand, and I can still make this happen.
No, I think it's well, it'll be for now. I'm okay with having RL and Star Citizen as things people know me for, because now once everyone starts transitioning over to Star Citizen, because they've seen me talk about it, I'll be the guy they go to. So setting that foundation now.
Yeah, and you just slowly add that in. You're like, oh, by the way, I have other channels, and then slowly people are like, oh, and the bleed over is inevitable. And I think that stuff is always really nice to see. I think that's even I know Sunless actually just he started to do the more Sunless channel where he's starting to do stuff. A shout out to him for doing CRL stuff. That's one of those you know, subgroups of Rocket League that I can't wait to get more and more popular. It's already getting like a good amount of funding, but seeing like the biggest creator in the scene make a video really specifically about like the history, also edited by one of my best friends in the scene, Seb Dot, another esports talent and editor. That was also just such a lovely thing to see, because I do think that creators can influence a lot, but knowing that it's like that's a video that would not fit like in the main channel, so like having something else to like be able to output, I think it's just another outlet for the creativity. So pros and cons to like splitting up your content, but I do think it's it's nice that the content is being made in general, and I'll take those dubs, I
Yeah.
suppose, when they do come up.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, this was a great conversation. I'm gonna ask one more question because I actually have to get going. Usually it's the other way. But I want to just ask you before you go, what the coolest thing you've ever done in a video game was? Can you think of the kind of or the sickest, even if it's a personal thing you did off camera, like it's just an achievement, or maybe it was a sick trick you've done?
This is completely off camera because this is before I even had any thoughts of streaming, or even that I knew how to stream or had something
Here,
to.
we didn't get a full screen on you yet. We'll do the full screen for this one.
So the coolest thing I've ever actually done in gaming was Modern Warfare 3. I mentioned that earlier, the OG one on my PS3. I was pretty good. Not to be cocky, I was pretty good at like trying to be a pub stomper. I had like a 4.0 KD. I think I peaked at like 4.2. At the time, I had this buddy McGrath. I've never talked to him before ever since I stopped playing on that PSN. But great dude. We used to play together. He was like a 14-year-old when I was like a 17-year-old. Back in the day, back in New York State. We lived like a couple hours away. Never met him. Never talked to him in VC. We only text chatted through the PSN chat, and we were duo queuing in 6v6 domination, and we got on Dome, which is a very small map, which means you can get pretty high kill games. And in Modern Warfare 3, if you got 25 kills in a single life, you get a Moab, which is basically a bomb you can call in that counts down and immediately wipes the other team. But the game keeps going. It's not like a nuke in Modern Warfare 2. So the content creators would always go for like double, triple, quadruple Moabs, where basically you're trying to get as many as possible in a singular game before it completes. And me and my friend both got a double, and we called it a broab because we both got 2. So we called in 4 across the game. And I remember I had a Bluetooth keyboard hooked up to my PS3, and we were just like, oh my God, like all caps freaking out. And that was so funny about it is I'm like, there's no way to share this with anyone because there was no screen capture that we had. You can't save like a replay of the game really, or at least that is easily. And it was just so funny because in that singular moment, I'm like, this is one of the coolest things, most difficult things I've ever had to do. And it was just like a fun memory with a dude that I crossed paths with, was like super good friends with. And then we went off into our own separate lives. But it's definitely something I'd always remember.
That's cool. I think it's just something, it's like, that's one of those things that I like to think back to sometimes is in gaming. We've all done really, really cool stuff. I guarantee every single person that's played a video game does something they think is cool. And that's what's great about games is being able to allow us to do those things in a world where it's that I wouldn't want to drop a bunch of Moabs on people in real life, let alone would I be able to do that.
I'm very much opposed to that idea of bombing anyone.
So, but to be able to do a cool thing like that, like that's cool. That's something I would never do in real life. And I get to, live in this fantasy world and do something. And so I think it's really cool to hear what those moments were for people in gaming, because it really
is the video game equivalent of like when you drop something and then you like kick it up and catch it. And
you're like, right.
You look around and you're like, wait, no one saw that. I'm alone. Like it's like no one would ever know that. So,
and then you go and install cameras in your house, and
that is why Nest exists, so that you can always have cameras to catch your cool shit that you see off camera.
That's great. Hey, well, everyone in the comments, please let me know the coolest thing you've ever done in gaming as well. I'd like to hear some of those stories. But for now, I gotta say thank you so much to Danger Taco for joining me. This was for at least for me. Maybe it sucked for you, but for me, this was a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate you coming on.
No, I appreciate for being invited. I always love doing podcasts, and you're definitely someone I've always admired in the esports space, Rocket League space specifically. So it's always nice to be able to sit down and talk. Well, I suppose we'll find out.
Yeah,
if this is a mistake for me, this is going to murder my career.
That's right. I'm going to cut this up to all the bad things you said sarcastically and just make that the montage.
There it is.
Anyways, thanks for joining. Again, you guys can join the Discord in the link below. I'd love to have you for conversation throughout the week, and make sure to hit the subscribe and follow button, all that jazz. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.